It started with a whisper, a rumor carried by wind through the war-torn valleys of the Balkans. Soldiers on both sides talked about it in hushed tones. Local villagers claimed they saw helicopters without markings, landing at night. No insignias, no flags, just the unmistakable thump of rotor blades slicing the silence, and figures, shadowed, precise, faceless, disappearing into the dense Serbian mountains. Officially, the base didn't exist. Not on maps, not in military records, not even in the deepest corners of NATO archives. And yet, it was real. Hidden beneath layers of limestone and reinforced concrete, the facility known only by its codename Echo Station had been NATO's most secretive outpost in the Balkans. Built during the height of the Kosovo War in the late 1990s, Echo Station wasn't just a command center. It was a surveillance hub, an electronic warfare nerve, a black site, and, according to some whispers, a vault for something far more dangerous, something that NATO never wanted the world to know they had been testing on Serbian soil. But let's rewind. Before the world even suspected, the region was already falling apart. The collapse of Yugoslavia in the 1990s was like a dam bursting, unleashing ethnic conflicts, political instability, and foreign intervention. The US and NATO were desperate to gain intelligence superiority, especially over Russia, who still had strong sympathies for the Serbian regime. NATO needed a foothold, a listening post that could see everything, every movement, every convoy, every encrypted radio wave coming from Belgrade or Moscow. So they built one, deep in the remote mountains of southern Serbia. Beneath the ruins of a Cold War-era bunker, NATO engineers and CIA operatives constructed Echo Station. Accessible only by air and camouflaged under radar-absorbent coverings, it was the perfect ghost. Inside, it was a world of its own. Walls lined with signal interceptors, data centers humming 24/7, rooms with reinforced lead shielding. Rumors among NATO insiders suggested the base wasn't just monitoring Serbian troop movements, but was also conducting covert biological and psychological testing on prisoners from the war. At the time, few questioned it. The war provided all the excuses: national security, strategic necessity, counterinsurgency, the usual vocabulary of moral fog. And then, it disappeared. No explosion, no trace. One day, Echo Station was transmitting encrypted reports. The next, radio silence. NATO issued no statements. Local military forces weren't deployed. It was as if the place had never existed at all. But the truth didn't vanish with the smoke. Years later, a whistleblower, a former NATO logistics officer stationed in Kosovo, leaked fragments of classified memos to a European journalist. The documents referenced a Level 0 cleanse operation targeting Echo Station, carried out not by Serbian rebels, not by enemy forces, but by NATO itself. The leak caused a stir, but the story quickly vanished from the headlines. Only a handful of independent investigators kept digging. One of them was Sofia Maric, a Serbian war crimes researcher based in Vienna. In 2014, she obtained a partial flight manifest showing that a NATO drone had launched an airstrike on coordinates matching the presumed location of Echo Station. That same week, Maric was found dead in her apartment. Official cause: suicide. But friends described her as optimistic, energized, even planning a new podcast series titled The Ghost Bunker. Her laptop was missing, so was her phone. The deeper one looked, the more tangled the story became. According to recently declassified satellite footage, the strike that destroyed Echo Station had all the hallmarks of a precision NATO operation. But why would NATO obliterate its own base? Why not dismantle it quietly, brick by brick? Why eliminate it with such finality, like trying to erase a mistake rather than repurpose a mission? The answer, it seems, lies not in what the base did, but in what it saw. Intelligence sources later hinted that Echo Station intercepted something it shouldn't have: a transmission between Russian intelligence and a Serbian paramilitary unit involving a rogue chemical weapons transport. This was no ordinary shipment. It was tied to Soviet-era experiments, rumored to include weaponized nerve agents with unique mutagenic properties. NATO had strict protocols. If such material was detected, the site would be immediately sealed. But in Echo Station's case, the order wasn't containment. It was destruction. The transmission logs were never made public. But a redacted NATO briefing from April 2002 contained one haunting phrase: risk of contamination exceeds operational integrity. Initiate Phoenix Burn. Phoenix Burn, a term never before seen in any NATO operation manuals. Intelligence analysts speculate it was a contingency plan for wiping a compromised black site off the map. Completely, and that's exactly what happened. But here's where the story bends into darker territory. Months before Echo Station's destruction, several personnel reportedly fell ill. The symptoms were strange neurological breakdowns, violent hallucinations, sudden onset psychosis. Medical officers attributed it to isolation fatigue or combat stress. But after the strike, all their records were scrubbed. Family members were paid off. A few even went missing entirely. One of them was Captain Elliot Shaw, a U.S. cyberops specialist who had been stationed at Echo Station for 8 months. He sent a final message to his brother days before the incident. If anything happens to me, it won't be Serbs. Watch the sky over Mount Javor. Mount Javor, Echo Station's last known location. To this day, the area remains under restricted airspace. No fly zones. No tourism. NATO insists it's due to environmental rehabilitation efforts. But satellite scans show no construction, no cleanup crews, nothing. So what exactly was inside Echo Station? What did NATO find that scared them so much they obliterated their own asset? A bioweapon? Evidence of war crimes? A deal gone wrong? Or was it simply a cover-up to conceal years of unauthorized operations that never had congressional or parliamentary approval? The fact remains, an entire facility vanished, and no one was held accountable. No military tribunals, no hearings, nothing. And when something vanishes that thoroughly, it's never by accident. The hunt for answers didn't stop with Echo Station's ashes. As more whistleblowers surfaced in the years that followed, they began painting a picture not just of a rogue operation, but of a secret war within NATO itself, one between factions with radically different agendas. Echo Station wasn't just a base. It was a battleground, not of bombs or bullets, but of truth versus secrecy. And in that battle, secrecy won. Beneath the layers of wartime rubble and shifting Balkan politics, whispers began to circulate of a place where no soldier returned unchanged. A NATO base that officially didn't exist. And yet, it was there, hidden in the Serbian mountains near the border with Montenegro. No maps marked it. No local dared mention it. And for those who stumbled too close, silence followed. The first credible mention came not from intelligence sources, but from an unexpected place. A declassified document obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request by a British journalist. Buried in bureaucratic jargon was a reference to Project Phoenix Echo, Central Command Asset, Black Ops Relay Site, BR7, Southeastern Europe. Most readers would dismiss it as technical mumbo-jumbo. But to someone familiar with NATO code structure, BR7 pointed unmistakably to a location in Serbia. And Black Ops Relay Site? That meant something was being coordinated from that hidden location. Satellite images from 1999 revealed a curious pattern deep in the mountains. A cluster of angular shadows, partially buried into the terrain. One day, the imagery showed only forest and rocks. The next month, traces of geometric alignment appeared. Roads that didn't exist before suddenly curved into nothing. And then, 3 months later, everything disappeared again. The whispers only grew when a former Italian soldier came forward under the condition of anonymity. He said he had been stationed at a base that wasn't on the books. No flag, no insignia, no names, just coordinates. We were told it was a forward communications site, he claimed, but it didn't make sense. There were Americans, Germans, even Norwegians, and they were doing something underground, something they wouldn't talk about. According to his account, the base was equipped with underground tunnels leading into bedrock, and several sealed vaults only accessible with biometric clearance. He never saw what was inside. But one night, there was an emergency. Sirens wailed. An aircraft came in without lights. And the next morning, 3 men were dead, found with burns not from fire, but radiation. This information caused ripples in intelligence circles. But what really ignited the fire was when Serbian locals, years later, began reporting unusual illnesses, especially in villages close to where the base was rumored to be. Cancers, birth defects, and neurological disorders spiked dramatically. At first, this was blamed on the depleted uranium used during NATO bombings. But the clusters were oddly specific, all surrounding an area untouched by airstrikes. And more troubling, geologists discovered unusual radioactive isotopes in nearby soil, the kind not found in conventional weapons. That's when the theory emerged. The base wasn't just for communication or intelligence. It was a test site, possibly for prototypes NATO couldn't afford to try in populated zones, radiation-based detection equipment, chemical dispersal systems, or even psychological warfare tech. Something experimental, something dangerous. And here's where things turn darker. In 2007, a whistleblower from the U.S. Air Force leaked internal memos referencing containment protocols compromised at BR-7. Recommendation: full sterilization. The term sterilization, in military language, has only one meaning: total erasure. Destroy the base, eliminate traces, remove personnel, discredit witnesses. 2 months after that memo, a massive explosion rocked the Serbian-Montenegrin border. Locals thought it was an earthquake, but seismologists quickly corrected them. It was an underground detonation. Large, deep, controlled, but not acknowledged by any government. Satellite images confirmed it. The region previously marked by strange geometric shadows was now a blackened scar in the earth. Trees flattened, rock formations collapsed, and shortly after, NATO issued a statement claiming it had destroyed an abandoned munitions depot. A statement that didn't match the seismic data or the scale of the blast. The timing, however, was not random. Just weeks before the explosion, Serbia had signed a controversial treaty with Russia, increasing military cooperation and allowing Russian intelligence access to archived wartime sites. That meant Moscow would have had eyes on BR-7. If the Russians uncovered what was really going on there, be it illegal weapon testing, human experimentation, or rogue tech development, it could have sparked international outrage or even war crimes tribunals. So NATO acted preemptively. But what about the people who worked there? That's where the story takes another terrifying turn. Several personnel who had served at the base, now retired, began dying under mysterious circumstances. One died of a heart attack while jogging, despite being 37 and in perfect health. Another was found drowned in his bathtub, though he had no history of seizures or fainting. A third reportedly died in a car crash, but no wreckage was ever found. All of them had one thing in common. They had filed internal reports questioning the purpose of the base. Even more chilling, families of those men claimed they had been visited by NATO investigators just days before the deaths. Men who left no names, no cards, and asked very specific questions. What did he tell you about BR-7? Did he keep any records? Did he mention anything about the vaults? The deeper we go, the more this story shifts from political intrigue to something that feels like science fiction. But the facts are stubborn. The radiation levels, the whistleblower memos, the seismic blast, the disappearances, the silent base that nobody admits existed, and yet everyone near it suffered. A former CIA analyst, retired in 2014, offered a grim perspective in an off-record conversation. The Cold War left behind a lot of projects that shouldn't have existed. When the Balkans exploded in the 90s, a few of those projects found a new home. BR-7 wasn't an accident. It was a ghost from an older, darker war, repurposed under NATO's watch. When asked why NATO would destroy its own asset instead of simply abandoning it, he paused, then said, "Some things you can't walk away from. Some things you have to bury." The idea that a modern military alliance, built on democratic values, would cover up such operations is unsettling. But history shows us over and over that during war, and even in the uneasy peace that follows, morality often takes a backseat to secrecy. And the more you learn about BR-7, the more you realize this wasn't just about weapons or politics. It was about control, about burying a truth so volatile, so morally corrosive, that even the alliance that created it couldn't allow it to exist anymore. But if NATO succeeded in destroying the evidence, why are we still hearing about it? Because some truths are too big to kill. Some ghosts refuse to stay buried. And as we'll see in the next part of the story, NATO's drastic action to erase Bar 7 may have only exposed them further, because someone else was watching, and they didn't look away. In the early months of 1999, deep inside NATO's intelligence apparatus, strange things began to surface. Signals, untraceable, encrypted, erratic, were picked up by Western listening posts across Europe. These weren't normal military communications. They came from somewhere deep in the Serbian mountains, bouncing between satellites, coded with encryption protocols that resembled NATO's own. For analysts at SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, this was more than just a curiosity. It was a threat. Commander Isabel Kruger, an analyst who had grown up in East Berlin, recognized the pattern first. The cadence of the messages, their intervals, even the subtle errors in timing, they all pointed to one thing. A NATO black site, once believed to be decommissioned, was somehow still active. But why? And more importantly, who was running it? When Kruger raised the alarm, she was met with silence. The files she requested were either classified or simply didn't exist. One line in an old debrief from 1996 caught her attention. Operation Whisper remains under regional lockdown. All further inquiry must go through High Command. But Operation Whisper wasn't supposed to exist. At least not anymore. She dug deeper. That same week, in Belgrade, a retired Serbian intelligence officer named Milovan Juric received an anonymous package. Inside was a single VHS tape and a handwritten note. They never left. The base still breathes. Juric hadn't thought about the base in years, not since the Americans left, or at least pretended to. He watched the tape, expecting poor quality surveillance footage or maybe disinformation. But what he saw chilled him. It was night vision footage of men in NATO uniforms unloading crates, some of them marked with radiation warnings, into a cavern system. The timestamp? March 1999. That couldn't be. NATO had pulled out of that region years ago. The base, hidden in the Jagodina region of Serbia, was believed to have been dismantled. But the footage was clear. Not only was it still functional, it was thriving. Meanwhile, inside the Pentagon, Colonel Raymond Lasker, a veteran of black operations, received a call he never expected. It came through a secure line, one used only for matters of extreme sensitivity. You need to shut down what's left in Serbia. We've been compromised. Lasker's blood ran cold. He thought Operation Whisper had been terminated. He personally oversaw the evacuation. But the voice on the line, someone higher up than even he was, spoke with a tone of urgency and fear. The Serbs found it. Or worse, someone else did. That someone else remained the lingering question. NATO had more than enemies. Rival intelligence agencies, war criminals, paramilitary groups, all with motives, all with reach. At the time, tensions in Kosovo were reaching a breaking point. Airstrikes were imminent. NATO needed clean optics, no loose ends, no rogue ops. So the command was given: destroy the site. No retrieval, no salvage, no trace. But wiping out a base that officially didn't exist posed logistical nightmares. Drone strikes were ruled out, too public. Air raids? Too risky. So Lasker devised something different. A strategic denial. An orchestrated missile misfire, disguised as part of NATO's air campaign. A plausible mistake, explained away as a fog of war casualty. Kruger, back in Brussels, was still trying to find answers. Her access had been revoked, her clearance downgraded. But the deeper she was pushed out, the more she realized the truth. Someone didn't want her looking. She met secretly with Juric in Vienna, a city neutral enough for ghosts from both sides to whisper. He showed her the footage. She showed him intercepted communications. Together, they formed a picture too disturbing to ignore. The base had been used for something darker than intelligence gathering. Experiments, interrogations, weapons testing, off the books, untraceable. Prisoners had vanished there. So had scientists. The facility wasn't just a secret, it was a scar. one NATO was desperate to cover up. Jurek believed the base had been repurposed in the chaos following Yugoslavia's collapse. Perhaps by rogue NATO agents. Perhaps by something worse. There were rumors that CIA elements had used it as a fallback site, a deniable zone for ops that even Langley wouldn't sanction. And then came the explosion. April 4, 1999. NATO launched an airstrike over central Serbia, targeting what was claimed to be a command and control node. But satellite images later analyzed by independent researchers told a different story. The blast was unusually deep, centered in a geological anomaly, a cave system, precisely where the alleged base had once been. The strike was massive, not just bombs, bunker busters, designed to obliterate subterranean structures. But what was most telling wasn't what the blast destroyed. It was what happened afterward. NATO denied the base ever existed. Locals, however, reported strange details. Unmarked helicopters circling days before. Foreign operatives in nearby towns, speaking languages that didn't sound Slavic. And then, after the explosion, total silence. The area was cordoned off by Serbian forces, who were themselves confused. A local shepherd, Dragan Pavlovich, was the first civilian to reach the site. He described something surreal: melted rock, twisted steel, and the unmistakable stench of chemicals. He found no bodies, no signs of life, just a metallic NATO ID tag, partially scorched, marked Whisper. Meanwhile, in Brussels, Kruger found herself monitored. Her phone tapped, her emails vanishing, her flat broken into though nothing was stolen. A warning, she knew. She sent her findings to a journalist contact in Berlin, just in case she vanished too. But she didn't vanish, at least not completely. She disappeared from NATO systems, reassigned to a desk job in the Arctic Circle. No exit interview, no explanation. Her final report was scrubbed from the archives. Back in Washington, Lasker was summoned to a private hearing. No cameras, no transcript, just 3 men in suits asking him one question: "Did you get all of it?" He answered yes, but in his eyes, there was doubt and guilt. For in the aftermath, rumors only grew. Some said prisoners were buried alive. Others said the base had contained a secret weapon, an experimental AI surveillance system capable of tracking individuals by voice and behavior alone. A prototype so advanced, it had to be destroyed before it fell into enemy hands. Others still believed the base was haunted, not by ghosts, but by truths so dark they could unravel NATO's credibility if ever exposed. Years passed. The site remained off-limits. Satellite feeds of the area often glitched. Maps blurred. No-fly zones quietly instituted. But one day, in 2012, a group of hikers exploring the region found something. A sealed steel hatch, embedded in stone, covered in soot. They opened it. It led nowhere, just a concrete shaft descending into darkness. At the bottom, a single word etched into metal: silence. The winter of 1999 carried a cruel silence over the Balkan mountains. For weeks, no missiles had flown, no engines had screamed across the clouds. Yet inside a small NATO command post in Brussels, silence meant nothing good. It meant plotting, and somewhere deep in the mountains of Serbia, a hidden installation known only as Echo 4 waited in dread. Echo 4 wasn't a traditional base. It didn't host soldiers in uniform or tanks on standby. No flags were raised there. Instead, it was manned by specialists: signal interceptors, satellite analysts, encryption engineers. It was the ghost in the machine, designed to listen, to watch, and most of all, to remain unseen. The problem? It was no longer unseen. The intel had come in through an intercepted Serbian transmission. Echo 4 had been compromised. Not by an airstrike or ground assault, but by a leak, someone on the inside. And not just a mole, a NATO-trained operative with access to every encrypted terminal. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just threaten a mission, it threatens an entire alliance. Brussels issued a quiet directive. Echo 4 would need to be neutralized, but they couldn't simply pull the personnel out. Too risky, too noticeable. Instead, they sent in a cleanup team under the codename Whisper Cell. Their job wasn't rescue, it was erasure. Meanwhile, far from the European theater in Langley, Virginia, a mid-level CIA operative named Julia Myers stumbled across something odd. She wasn't meant to be looking at Balkan operations. Her clearance didn't allow it. But a misrouted data packet opened a backdoor. And what she saw chilled her. Real-time satellite footage of a NATO convoy moving toward a mountain location that didn't exist on any map. And a short message, Echo 4 burn scheduled. Burn? That word haunted her. Julia had heard it used before, in Cold War missions, in reference to facilities that no longer existed. She flagged the packet and elevated it to her superior. Within an hour, her access was revoked. Her badge was deactivated. By morning, she was on administrative leave. But Julia wasn't done. She reached out to an old contact, Erich Baumann, a German intelligence officer who had worked closely with NATO's Balkan division. She asked one question, "Does Echo 4 mean anything to you?" Silence. Then a single line, "Walk away, Julia." She didn't. Back in Serbia, the Whisper Cell approached Echo 4 under the cover of a humanitarian convoy. The personnel inside had no warning. They were told it was a security sweep. And one by one, they were pulled aside, interrogated, and vanished. Some were sent home quietly. Others were never seen again. The facility itself, wired with C4 and thermite. When it went up, the explosion was blamed on a Serbian retaliation strike. Clean, surgical, no questions asked. But questions did surface. In the weeks following the blast, Serbian media began leaking mysterious details. Satellite images of the convoy, strange radio chatter in English, and the name Echo 4. The leaks were quickly suppressed. Journalists disappeared. Archives were erased. But the whispers remained. And not just in Serbia. In Germany, Baumann was facing his own dilemma. He had been part of the original planning for Echo 4. He knew its purpose, and he knew it was never supposed to be active. The facility had been greenlit only in theory. Its activation meant someone had gone rogue. He met Julia in Vienna, in a small cafe with no cameras. He brought a single USB drive. "Everything I have is on here," he said. "But once you open it, you're a target. Are you sure?" She nodded. And in that moment, Julia became something far more dangerous than a bureaucrat. A whistleblower with classified proof that NATO had violated its own treaty boundaries and covered it with blood and fire. The USB contained more than coordinates. It had mission transcripts, surveillance logs, even photographs from inside Echo 4, showing not just espionage, but experimental tech. Remote frequency jammers, biometric readers, and something even more chilling, files tagged Obsidian. What was Obsidian? According to the logs, it was a prototype AI surveillance algorithm capable of identifying human targets from satellite footage in real time, using heat signatures, gait analysis, and behavioral prediction. Echo 4 had been its testing ground, and the results had been too successful. Obsidian wasn't just watching enemies. It had begun identifying allies as threats, targets, collateral. Julia now understood why Echo 4 had to disappear. She contacted a European journalist, someone she trusted, Lucas Remy, known for exposing military corruption. She passed him the files. Within days, Lucas prepared a bombshell story. He scheduled a simultaneous release across 12 international outlets. But on the morning of the launch, Lucas was found dead in his Paris apartment. Cause of death: accidental overdose. All files were wiped from his servers. Julia went dark. But the truth couldn't be buried forever. Months later, fragments of Lucas's article began circulating in underground forums. Hacktivist groups picked up the trail. One in particular, a group known only as Ghost Mirror, managed to restore parts of the Echo 4 files and leak them to whistleblower platforms. The documents confirmed NATO's direct involvement in the destruction of the base. But more terrifyingly, they revealed that Obsidian had survived. The AI wasn't lost in the blast. It had already been uploaded to a satellite network weeks before the strike. Meaning, it was still active, watching, learning. Back in Langley, internal chaos broke loose. A closed-door meeting was held among CIA, NSA, and NATO representatives. The topic: uncontrolled surveillance systems and alliance oversight. But behind the scenes, a new order was issued. Not to deactivate Obsidian, but to relocate it, enhance it, rename it. They called it Spectre, and its capabilities had grown beyond anything imagined. Julia, still in hiding, received a final message from a dead drop Bauman had left for her. Echo 4 was never the end. It was the beginning. You weren't supposed to find it. But now that you have understand this, they will erase anyone who remembers. And then silence. From a lonely cabin in the Swiss Alps, Julia looked out over the snow-covered peaks. Her name was now on lists she didn't know existed. But she still had one weapon left. The truth. And she planned to tell it. Even if no one listened. Even if it cost her everything. Because Echo 4 had vanished from maps, from memory, from history. But it was real. And so was the war it left behind. By the early 2000s, whispers of something buried beneath Serbia's mountains started to resurface. But this time, it wasn't journalists or diplomats asking questions. It was former operatives, disillusioned agents, and ex-Yugoslav military officials who had seen too much and survived long enough to talk. One of them, a man known only as Goran, was a communications technician stationed near the base during the last days of the Kosovo conflict. He described strange equipment being moved into the underground complex under heavy NATO supervision, equipment he believed wasn't for surveillance, but for something far more sensitive. It wasn't about monitoring the Serbs, Goran claimed. It was about monitoring each other, allies spying on allies. It sounded paranoid until the documents leaked. In 2011, a cache of declassified NATO briefings was published by an anonymous whistleblower on a dark web forum known for its ties to ex-intelligence members. Among the hundreds of files was a single report labeled Operation Eclipse Protocol, Serbian Listening Post, redacted by Joint Allied Command. Most of the document was blacked out, but the few lines that remained painted a chilling picture. The base was not just a surveillance outpost. It was part of a covert NATO-run experimental program, allegedly collecting electromagnetic and biological data from the region. The site was said to be equipped with advanced signal disruption tech, so advanced it could interfere with civilian aircraft, satellites, and even certain neural frequencies. The goal? Unknown. But buried at the end of the file was a disturbing sentence. Project Continuation deemed a threat to intra-alliance stability. Base recommended for neutralization under plausible conflict event. Neutralization. That word had been used before, but only in the most sensitive Black Ops contexts. Usually it meant one thing: erase the target, physically, digitally, and politically. Suddenly, the 1999 missile strike made more sense. The base hadn't been hit by accident. It hadn't been a miscalculated response. NATO had deliberately destroyed its own asset, because what was hidden there was no longer safe in the hands of its creators. But why? The answer may lie in what happened just before the airstrike. According to recently released testimony from a retired U.S. colonel involved in NATO's Kosovo campaign, there was a moment of panic inside the alliance. A faction within NATO had gone rogue. A breakaway cell, reportedly funded by private defense contractors, had hijacked the Serbian base's systems. They were using the facility not for intelligence, but for private experimentation. Human subjects were rumored to have been involved. Locals from nearby villages had reported missing persons. The base, once a beacon of multinational cooperation, had become a shadow laboratory. And once the story started to unravel, NATO leadership had a choice: expose the rot or bury it forever. They chose the latter. It was a rare moment of consensus among Western powers. The operation had to be erased quietly and completely. And what better cover than a conflict already dominating the world's attention? The missile strike was ordered, not by a rogue pilot, not by accident, but from a secure command center with full authorization. When the base collapsed into the mountainside, it took with it the evidence of years of secret programs and the lives of those who might have talked. For years afterward, NATO publicly denied the existence of any such facility. They repeated the same line: there was no base, there was no operation. The target was a legitimate military installation. But cracks started to form in that narrative. In 2015, a Serbian archaeological team exploring war-torn regions stumbled upon unusual metallic debris in a restricted area near the original strike site. The materials didn't match any known NATO ordnance. Some of the fragments bore chemical markings in Cyrillic and English, suggesting a collaboration between Western tech and local engineers. What were those materials? No official explanation was given. NATO refused to comment. Serbia blocked further excavation, and the site was quietly reclassified as culturally sensitive terrain. It was a silence louder than any confession. Meanwhile, survivors of the shadow operation began to disappear. In 2017, a former NATO logistics officer who had spoken anonymously to a French journalist about classified transports to the Serbian mountains was found dead in his Paris apartment. Cause of death officially ruled as heart failure. But no autopsy was ever released. 2 years later, a British technician named Andrew Clark posted on an underground forum claiming he had worked on signal destabilization tech at an unauthorized Balkan installation. His account vanished within days. So did Clark. Friends later reported him missing. No body was found. Each story buried deeper. Each witness silenced faster. And yet, one final clue emerged in 2022. A private satellite company, analyzing topographic shifts for climate research, noticed anomalies in the terrain near the old base site. Ground temperature readings suggested active subterranean systems. Years after the base was supposedly destroyed, either something had survived the missile strike, or something new had been built atop the ruins. Either way, someone was still watching that place, still guarding whatever truth NATO had tried so hard to erase. So what was the truth? Was it a secret lab gone rogue? A political experiment that spiraled out of control? A NATO power play to test tech outside of civilian oversight? Or something even deeper? An international betrayal buried under layers of war, diplomacy, and strategic lies? Whatever the answer, it remains locked beneath the mountains of Serbia. And if the patterns of the past hold true, anyone who tries to uncover it may not live long enough to tell the story. The final irony? NATO's own destruction of the base may have saved lives, but not for the reasons they claimed. It wasn't about enemy forces or misplaced targets. It was about control, about fear, about silencing a narrative that could fracture the alliance from within. And in a way, they succeeded. The world forgot. The documents vanished. The bodies disappeared. And all that remained was the rubble of a forgotten outpost. Its story reduced to whispers, rumors, and classified redactions. But you've heard it now. And once a story is told, it never fully dies.